I remember thinking when I was in the mission home, like how cool it was that like nature and the city were together, because Sao Paulo is huge. It's a massive city. It's like third or fifth biggest city in the world, depending on how you count it. So it's huge, and there's just like skyscrapers, and it's not like New York, like they're shorter skyscrapers, but it's still like, it's just skyscrapers and hills and up and down and just lots of like, you know, sidewalks and streets and everything. But at the same time, like there's these massive trees growing up and just lots of plants, and so like it's a lot of green mixed in with the city. And I remember just looking and being like, okay, like this isn't like any other city I've been in. Like New York has like those tiny little trees that line the sidewalk, but these were like just normal massive trees that next to them. And I also remember trying not to cry in the mission home because I had no idea what was going on. They teach you Portuguese in the MTC, and it's great, and you learn the foundations of the language, but then you get there and speaking it and understanding it is a whole other thing. And so I arrived with a really big group of missionaries. There were like, I think like 11 sisters and 4 elders, which is not normal. Usually there's more elders than sisters, but it was just this big batch of sisters came, and a lot of them came from the Sao Paulo MTC, and then some had gotten their visas, and so they were coming from a mission, and me coming from the MTC, and we all get there, and there was one American who had gone to the Sao Paulo MTC, and so she was kind of talking with the other Brazilians and like the Chileans and the other people who were there, and the rest of us were kind of sitting there like, so what's going on? And our mission president spoke English, and so like if it was something important, he would say it to them in Portuguese and then translate for us in English. But the rest of the time it was just kind of fend for yourself. So it was good because you learn that way. But that was a big thing for me at the beginning, was just the language, because I like talking, so I wanted to be able to communicate. But once you get it down, it's a lot easier. But yeah, Brazil it's beautiful. The pizza's weird. We got pizza our first night there, and they put like corn on top and anchovies, and they don't have tomato sauce. It's just kind of a weird, and it's different in every state. But in Sao Paulo, that's the way we had it. And like lots of onions. I mean, like you can't even see the crust because there's so many onions on top. So that was kind of odd. But no, the people are really nice. They just open right up to you. Even when the sisters, like, I would try to say something and they would just like hang on my every word, trying to figure out what it was I was trying to say, and then be like, oh, like you want to say this, and just really nice, and like really just trying to help you and communicate with you. And it was awesome. So when I was there, there were about 200 missionaries in the Sao Paulo North Mission, which is a little bit on the bigger side, but not to like crazy big yet. And it's split between what's called the capital and interior. So the capital, the missionaries who are in the city itself, and then everybody else who's in the countryside. So there's kind of that split. So when you have like, you'll have like multi-zone meetings and things where just all the missionaries and all the zones in the capital get together and have a big meeting with the mission president, and there's training and announcements and that kind of thing. And then they do the same thing with all the missionaries in the interior. And there's usually more in the countryside than there is in the capital. So it grabs just kind of the city of Sao Paulo is divided into like north, south, east, west, and it's all different zones because it's so big. And so we get most of the north zone and then a giant chunk of the countryside. Like it almost goes into another state. Each of the areas are different. I served mostly in the countryside, and we had one area in the capital. And so it's a lot of hills, a lot of farmland. One thing that was surprising to me, just like geographically speaking, I guess, since I'm from Connecticut, it's like one city's here and then there, and it's all like the cities all share boundaries, like all the different towns. But in Brazil, it's like one town and then a long highway, and then you get to the other town and then a long highway. And so there's not like a lot of side by side. So you take like a lot of buses and things to get to where you want to go. So there's the Sao Paulo temple, which is in the city. It used to be in our mission, but then they created Sao Paulo West, I think it was, and then it got stolen from us. But we're still allowed to go there. So every 3 months, if you're in one of the areas in the capital, you can go to the Sao Paulo temple. There's also the Campinas temple, which is outside of our mission, but it's in the state of Sao Paulo. And the current mission president, the way he's doing it is now if you're in the countryside, then every 3 months you get to go to that temple. But my first year when it was a different mission president, like you only got to go if you were in the capital. And so there's a lot of temples in Brazil. But Campinas and then the Sao Paulo temple are the closest. And fun fact, Sao Paulo was the first temple in South America ever. It was built in the 80s, I think. So it's one of the older temples, but it's so cool. It's really pretty. The church in Brazil started, I want to say early 1900s, and it started down in the south of Brazil, and originally the mission language was German, because the south of Brazil was settled by a lot of Germans and a lot of people from like the Netherlands and that part of the world. And so, yeah, so they originally spoke German, and then they kind of moved up. And so Sao Paulo was like, I think right after the south, Sao Paulo was kind of the next part to be churchified. I don't know. So it's not entirely new. There are families that have been in the church for like 3 or 4 generations, but it's still, I mean, it's still comparatively new. And my last area was in a district way out in the middle of nowhere, edge of the mission boundaries kind of thing. And the church was still, again, like I had been there for a while, but it was still trying to put down roots and still kind of, sometimes it struggles to spread just because of like leadership and like, because there's kind of this burst where like a ton of people got baptized, but like nobody had any leadership training. So they had like a lot of new leaders and just kind of wonky stuff started happening. So I don't remember all the history, but it's kind of depends on where you're at, I guess. But people are really open to it because just there's so many churches in Brazil. There's so many. Like, I don't even know how many times on my mission, like we would pass a place, like for example, like the corner of a street, just kind of like an empty, like for rent building, whatever. And then a week later we pass it and it's a church set up with people there praying and like collecting tithing and everything. So they're very open to religion. I've told a couple of my friends this, that I would love to go to Brazil now because some of the things about the people that I found aggravating as a missionary, I think I'd really like it now as a non-missionary because they're just very laid back. They very much like, oh yeah, like most of them, I mean, obviously you'll find people who don't want anything, but most of them, like if you want to talk about religion or something, they're fine with that. Or they're very open about their beliefs and talking about God. Like there's no shame. You could just go up to somebody on the road and be like, hey, so what do you think about God? Like I can count on one hand the number of atheists I met in Brazil. There's just, and it was always a rare occurrence. Like it was always like, oh, okay. They're very open. As a result, sometimes when you try to get commitments out of them, they're like, oh yeah, one day, like whenever I have the time, like if I'm ever just passing by, yeah, I'll just go visit your church. And you kind of have to be like, no, it's only Sunday mornings. Like you can't just walk by on Monday. We're not going to be there. So sometimes getting a commitment out of them, it's a little hard. But my mission president always said, like if they're elect, if they're really one of the ones who are waiting for the gospel, then that won't be a problem. They're very open. They're very kind. I mean, you just go and so you don't knock on doors. What happens is like they have like a gate kind of in front of their house, like a metal grate or something, and then they'll have like a little courtyard and then their house. So you go up to the gate and you clap. Or if you know the person, you'll just call their name. And so like you can just clap at somebody's gate and just ask for a cup of water. Ask if you can just come inside and sit down if you're like dying or something. If it's a member, you can just be like, you know, we just needed to stop by. Like, can we just get your help for something? And if they can help you, they will. If they can't, they'll try and find somebody else who can. Like we would always, we would go up if we wanted to like just kind of do contacts. We would knock on someone's door and be like, hey, so like we're looking for somebody, whatever. And if like, you know, to share this message, and if they didn't want anything, we'd be like, oh, well, what about your neighbor? Like, what do you know? Do you think they'd like it? And they'd usually like, you could almost always get a referral for a neighbor, for like somebody they knew from work or somebody they knew from church or whatever. And so they're very loving. And like the minute they meet you and they get to know you and they like you, your entire family and friend group is included in that. Like if you go up and be like, oh yeah, we're a friend of so-and-so, and they're good friends with them, they'll be like, oh yeah, come on in. And they'll just let you in. They'll give you cake. They'll give you water. They'll give you whatever you want. And yeah, they're wonderful people. They just have really big hearts and they just let anybody in. It's wonderful. They're very touchy people. So like you meet somebody for the first time and like once you get talking and like you're like, oh yeah, I was like, nice to meet you. And you have to go and you've been talking for like 5 minutes. If they've like really opened up to you, they'll hug you and like you kind of do like kiss on the cheek thing. And And they'll do that with everybody. So, I mean, like, they're just very, I don't know, they show their love through, like, hugs and kisses, and, like, they're just very, very affectionate people, and I love that. It's kind of hard to be like that here because people get weirded out by it, but I wish I could be. I don't know, just the way that they're always so willing to help. I mean, I need to work on that in my life personally, but I wish I could be more like that. I mean, the minute they meet you and figure out that you're a good person, they just instantly want to help you with anything. And they will go out of their way, if they can't help you, to find somebody who will. They're just the nicest people. They're just just genuinely good people. And I wish I could, I'm working on being more like that, I guess. That's another thing about Brazilians I love. Like, if they get offended, they forget it so quickly. I had one companion I would argue with at least 5 times a day. And I'm like, oh, she must still be mad at me. Like, I would be mad at her because I thought she was mad at me. And then at the end of the day, she'd be acting totally normal and like nothing had happened. I'm like, oh, I need to work on that. I need to up my game. So they forget very easily. They forgive very easily. They don't really do Thanksgiving, but they always have holidays all the time, like such and such day of such and such saint, and a lot of the Catholic holidays. There was one time we talked to somebody and we're like, oh, why is the shop closed? He's like, oh, well, somehow it's like a holiday. Oh, what are you celebrating? I don't know, but it's a holiday. Like, literally had no idea what it was, but just that they had the day off. So they'll have a lot of days off. Those are great because you'll find people at home. Christmas, they celebrate more Christmas Eve than Christmas Day, because what happens is at midnight on Christmas Eve, that's when Santa Claus comes and delivers the presents. And like, traditions vary in the different families, how they do it. I've heard stories of like kids locking their dad in the closet because they're like, no, we know dad is Santa Claus, so we're going to prove it. But they like rigged up a whole thing so the presents still got delivered. I don't know. But yeah, and so like Christmas Eve proselyting is not going to happen. Our mission president let us go to they call it a churrasco, like it's like a barbecue kind of cookout sort of thing, at our ward mission leader's house Christmas Eve, because he's like, sisters, nobody's gonna let you in. Just go and have fun and just be back by 9:30. And we're like, okay. And then Christmas Day, everybody's kind of sleeping in because they were up really late. Carnaval, I was in like one of the larger cities in the countryside when that happened, and in the area I was in, the only thing that I noticed was that more drunk people showed up on the streets at night than normal, but like, and we would hear sometimes like fireworks and stuff going off, but I never saw anything super crazy for Carnival. So I think it depends where you're at. It's more of a bigger thing in the Northeast from what I've heard, like in the northeastern states, but in Sao Paulo, I mean, I imagine if you're in the city, it's bigger, but yeah. When there are large events, they'll set off fireworks. Don't worry, it's not gunfire like 8 times out of 10. They don't celebrate Halloween. It's sort of becoming a thing. We tried to have a Halloween dance, though, like an activity. And one of the wards, and in the end, the bishop nixed it because he was like, some of the members are worried about like being associated with like demons or witches or something, because there's still kind of that stereotype among some areas of Brazil. So we didn't have a Halloween party. So there is like the typical meal in Brazil, which is like what everybody eats every day when there's no special event, which is rice and beans, some kind of fried chicken or maybe like fried beef or something, and a salad. Salad could be anything from just a pile of tomatoes with olive oil and vinegar and salt on it, or it could be like lettuce and tomatoes. Usually it's kind of simple, but they like season things very simply there, but it's so good. Oh my gosh. I love rice and beans. I love it. I miss it so much. They'll do a lot of pasta too, because Sao Paulo is kind of like New York, where it's like kind of a mixing bowl. There's just a lot of people from different backgrounds there. So there's a lot of people with like Italian background. There's some people with like, I don't know, German background. There's some people who are from like the Northeast who have African descent. So you kind of get like everything mushed together. Sometimes like they have like these, they're called lancherias. It's just like a place you can go like on the side of the road. Sometimes it's like almost like a food truck. Sometimes it's like an actual building. And you just go and you can get different types of snacks, which are usually different types of baked or fried goods. And they have this thing called coxinha, which is the best thing in the world. It's like pulled chicken with like seasoning, and then they wrap it up in this ball of dough and fry it, and it is so delicious. They have some Arabic snacks, like things that they call esfihas, which are also like it's some kind of meat or some kind of flavoring in the middle, and then dough around it, but that's baked. They also do all these with like chocolate or like dulce de leche or whatever, and just sweet things. Pastel, which is like a calzone, except it's a thinner crust, and then just like something inside, and they fry it. It's so good. Like, those things are the best. I miss them so much. Sometimes, like, for dessert, you'll usually get dessert because you're a missionary. I had us my trainer. I was like, do you guys always eat dessert, or is it just because the sisters came over? Like, I can't tell. And it's just because the sisters came over. But they make a lot of, like, sometimes it'll be like a pudding or like a mousse. They have this fruit there called maracuja, which is like passion fruit in English. And they'll make a mousse from it, and it is so delicious. But if you eat like the straight up natural juice, it's also a natural relaxant, so it'll make you go to sleep. So be careful with that. They have something called Brigadeiro, which means brigadier. It's sweetened condensed milk boiled together with chocolate powder and butter. And then you kind of let it harden, and they'll like roll it into balls and like put it with sprinkles, or they'll just eat it straight out of the bowl. It's called Brigadeiro because there was this brigadier who I guess like came through Brazil conquering or something like that, and that was his favorite dessert, and everyone wanted to get on his good side, so everybody made it. And that is also very good. And they'll have like popsicles that are like Brigadeiro flavored and like everything. They have something called, depends on which city you're in, they call it different things. I learned it as like gelinha, which is like little ice, and it's kind of like a Go-Gurt tube, except it's like a thin plastic tube, usually clear plastic, and then inside they can make it with water or with milk mixed with like a juice or a flavoring, and they'll just freeze it. It's really good when it's hot outside and you've been walking all day and you're dying, and you just grab one for like $1 or $2 and you just eat it, and it helps you cool down, and it's really tasty. And people will just sell things out of their house sometimes. So, I mean, you could just like buy like an ice cream from somebody's house. It's great. I love it. If you can't tell, I miss it a lot. They will tell you that Portuguese is the hardest language to learn. This is false. They love Brazil and they think Portuguese is great, and it is, but it is not the hardest language to learn. But it is hard because there's just a lot of different tenses and things that we don't have in English. And there's a difference, if you know Spanish or whatever, there's a difference between por and para. You might never figure it out. That's okay. They'll still know what you're trying to say. I got really lucky in that my first 2 companions were Brazilian. And I only ever had one American companion on the mission. And even then, we never spoke English with each other. So as long as you just speak the language as much as possible, and don't be afraid to speak, even if you know you're going to mess up, because that's how you figure it out, is messing up and someone correcting you, or you looking in the book later and saying, oh, I did that wrong. But practicing is the best thing you can do. Doing companionship study in Portuguese, reading the scriptures in Portuguese, practice reading as well as speaking. Pray for the gift of tongues, because that's a good thing to have. It helps a lot. Don't be afraid to ask people to repeat things. They're not going to get offended. If they do, that's their problem, and they're probably not going to listen to your message anyway. But I mean, members and even people on the street, they're more than willing to help you figure things out. And if you ask like, oh, like, how do you say this? Then they'll help you as much as they can to figure it out. I carried my dictionary around with me for the first 6 months, something like that, 9 months. But even then, most of the time what helped was just looking at my companion and being like, hey, so like saying the sentence, getting to the word I didn't know, and then trying to describe it and having her tell it to me. That works way better than looking it up in the dictionary, because then you remember the whole process of how you got to that word. But yeah, you can do it. Portuguese is a lot of fun, and once you figure it out, it's great. It's a fun language. So they talk with their hands a lot, and there are very specific symbols that they'll use to talk with their hands. For example, like, oh, do you want water or do you want milk? You can just be like, oh, whichever. Or, oh, like, do you want to come over Monday or Tuesday? No, it doesn't matter to me, whatever works. And so like they'll just kind of like put their hands like this. And then there's this, which a lot of people do, but in Brazil it's like, it's a thing where they'll be like, come on, hurry up, we gotta go. And I used to practice that all the time in the road, and I think I freaked out my companions because they're like, we're going, and I'm like, oh no, sorry, I just wanted to practice. There's this thing that it used to bug me to no end until I figured out that they didn't mean anything by it. So sometimes instead of saying no to answer a question, they'll just go, and here that's kind of like to a little kid, like, no, no, no. But to them, it's just like a way of saying no. Also about like the hugging and kissing thing, guys do it to girls, girls do it to guys. Like it's just kind of just everybody does it. But as a missionary, as a sister missionary, you can only do it with girls. And guys, you have to give a handshake. And I got accidentally kissed, like not kiss, but you know, like the kiss on the cheek thing by a guy, like within my first week, I think. And my companion, she was like, no, sister, you can't. Here, we're going to practice. Like here, like pretend I'm going in. And she had me like hold my arm out and like keep it straight and everything. So that's the thing you have to be aware of. It's not like a sin, obviously, but it just kind of can create an awkward situation if you're like, oh. And if you say like, oh no, sorry, we can't, we're missionaries, they understand. They're not offended. It's fine. Clothing. I was not prepared. I taught a girl who was actually from Brazil that year before I left for the mission, which if God didn't set that up, I don't know who did. But she was from Sao Paulo. She was actually from my mission, from the Sao Paulo North area. And she was like, well, she's like, yeah, like it's really warm, but it also gets cold sometimes. Like you want to have a jacket or whatever. So me being me, I went out and bought a bunch of 3/4 length sleeves, which did not keep me warm when it was cold and did not keep me cool when it was warm. So if I were to do that again, I would say like, and besides, like what happens is it's cold in the morning, it heats up during the day, and then it gets cold at night. So I would say go with short sleeve shirts and then just bring sweaters that you can put over it. Also bring a warmer jacket because depending on what area you're in, it can get very cold. And yes, very cold, it's like 60, 50 degrees, but when you're there, it feels like 30 because you're acclimated and you're used to it being really warm. So yeah, short sleeves, stuff to go over it, layers. Layers are your friend because then you can take them off during the day and put them on again when it gets cold. Also, people always complain about hygiene products, feminine supplies. It's just that people in Brazil don't believe in tampons. So if you're fine not using tampons, then that's okay. You don't have to stock up on like a year and a half's worth of it. Even if you do use tampons, it would probably be better to just have your family send you stuff. Personally, it depends on your situation. But like, they have toothpaste, they have soap, they have showers. You don't have to worry about hygienic stuff like that. You might want to slip in, again with the clothes, you might want to slip in a pair of like nylons or whatever they're called, pantyhose. Because again, it can get kind of cold some days during the winter for like a month. But you'll want them. And make sure your shoes, good shoes. I mean, you can buy shoes when you're in Brazil, but Brazilian clothes are not the best quality. They can fall apart pretty quickly, and so you'll want good shoes that will get you through. Chaco sandals or something like that, like kind of like thick sandals are really good. Mine lasted me my whole mission. They only got a crack in them like the last couple months. So one more thing for the sisters while we're talking about toiletries and hygienics and stuff. Brazilian deodorant is terrible. They have aerosol or they have this like roll-on stuff and it doesn't really do anything. So either bring 18 months supply of deodorant or have your parents ship you deodorant every now and then. Yeah, it's not. I had to use it the last couple of weeks because I ran out and I got rid of it as soon as I came home. It's not the highest quality stuff in the world. Chicken heart. One time we clapped at a guy's door and all we got time to say was, "Hi, we're from the Church of Jesus Christ." And he just started this rant at us like, "I don't want anything with you evangelicals." And at first we tried to like, "But we're not evangelicals." And he's like, "Oh, like you always come to my door and this and this and this." And he starts like confessing things to us because he was basically, I guess he used to be like some sort of minister in another church. and he would pay people to come in and pretend they were sick and that they had been healed. And he's like, I know, like, it's all a sham and this and this. And we're like, but we don't do that in our church. And finally we're like, well, can we give you this pass along card? I don't want anything from you. I would use stronger language if you weren't women. Now get out of here. And we're like, okay, have a nice night. And we just walked away and started laughing, because sometimes that's all you can do in that situation. Being able to go to the temple when you're on your mission, because there's a lot of things in the temple. I mean, obviously they relate to all parts of life, but especially when you're on your mission, everything seems to come back to missionary work. And so in the temple, like, you kind of renew that sense that you are a messenger, you are sent from God, you are representing Him. And I was lucky enough to be able to go twice while I was on my mission, and then one time before I went home. And each time it was just, especially that last time, it was a very sacred experience, kind of preparing myself to re-enter the real world. I was really nervous, but being in the temple, that was a very sacred experience, I think, being able to be there before going back home. My first area, we went to get food once. There's like a lot of like takeout places or like restaurants where you can go and relatively cheap. And so we'd gotten money for lunch. The sister wasn't able to be there to actually feed us, and so she gave us money to go buy food. And we went, and they have a dish which is called bife a carvalho, which means like beef a la horse. And I remember, like, that was one of the options, and my companion was like, oh, it's so good. And I looked at it, and I looked at her, and I'm like, carvalho? Like, horse? Like, what? And she had to explain. She's like, it's not horse meat, it's just what they call it. I'm like, but why? And she's like, I don't know why they call it that. It's a strip of beef with like a fried egg on top. I don't know why that's a horse, but it is, apparently. Like, not literally, but that's what they call it. It's one I'm still learning, but I think throughout my entire mission I had to learn to be satisfied with my work. Because as a missionary, I feel like, especially in Brazil, because you kind of go and especially with my first mission president, it kind of had a very military feel to it. Almost like, like you go and like you follow the rules and you'll be blessed. But that doesn't always happen, or it doesn't always happen in the way you expect. And so then you start to think like, well, I'm not having baptism, so what am I doing wrong? And you try to like examine everything, and you're like, oh, well, I woke up at like 30 seconds after 6:30, or like I fell asleep while I was at my morning prayer, or we had a lunch appointment that lasted more than an hour. Like, we're sinning, like, it's terrible. This is what we need to be more obedient. And it's really easy to get down on yourself. And at least for me personally, very easy to just kind of, just start to like nitpick at everything. It's hard to be satisfied because you just, like I said, you could just nitpick, and it's easy to say, oh, I didn't do well because of that and because of that, and I'm not having baptisms because of this. But learning to apply the atonement, and yes, you can always do better, but it doesn't always happen. And that's why we're here, I think, is just that's a big thing for me, is learning how to apply the atonement. And I had it down on my mission, and then I kind of lost it, and now I'm getting it back. Because just, applying it on the mission, you have to apply it differently in each circumstance, I feel like. So then learning to apply it with school, and then learning to apply it to personal life. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, learning about the atonement. And I'm still trying to learn more about it. But that was kind of I think that was the biggest lesson for me to learn there. I can do this. I think, not necessarily that I gained it on my mission, but on my mission, I think I finally learned to recognize that I have the gift of tongues. Because I haven't always liked languages, but I've been good at picking them up and learning them. It's been something that's come easier to me than for other people. And then on my mission, like, I was able to pick the language up. After my first transfer, I could already communicate pretty well. And after a couple transfers, I was good. I mean, obviously, I still had a lot to learn, but I could get my point across, and I could communicate with someone without having to look at my companion and be like, "What? Can you do that?" And just kind of learning to acknowledge that and not necessarily be prideful about it, but just be honest. Like, yeah, it's something I have. Learning to talk to people. I'm not the kind of person who likes just starting up conversations with people, and I still feel awkward doing it, but I can. if I need to go and ask somebody about something, I'm a lot more confident. I know how to do it, like, rehearse it in my head beforehand or whatever I need to do. And so just that confidence to strike up conversations. I can do small talk now. I used to be terrible at small talk, and I still don't like it, but I can do it if I have to. So I think conversational skills was the biggest thing, which is funny because I learned them in Portuguese, and then I came back and I was terrible at conversation because I'd forgotten English. But now I'm getting those skills in English again. So they have these things in Brazil called temporal, which it's just this storm. It just appears out of nowhere. And we're talking rain, thunder, lightning, hail. I had 2 of them on my mission, and both times we got stuck outside during it. And both times we had one umbrella between the 2 of us. So the first time it was like my 3rd transfer, and we walked out of somebody's house and we had to go to the other side of town, but it had started hailing. And the lady was like, "Oh, let me give you a ride, but you're not allowed to get rides with non-members." And we're like, "Oh, no, we're fine." So we're walking with the one, and it's like one of those like not pocket size, but like bag sized umbrellas. So it's this like kind of tiny thing, and we're walking with this umbrella behind us, and like the hail is hitting us, and my companion's back is soaked, and we're just getting soaked, and we might as well have not had the umbrella. And then after like 10 minutes, it cleared up, and it was like blue sky, sun, everything. It was fine. And then the second time, my companion had left her umbrella, so this time I was the one who had the umbrella, and we're sharing it. And I had my sandals on this time, and so I just remember hail started hitting my toes, and we're just like scrunched up against a wall trying to shield ourselves until finally it subsided enough for us to like dash up the street to a member's house we were headed to. And we walked in, I'm literally wringing water out of my skirt. This wasn't as crazy, but one time we were headed back home, and this massive just rainstorm started up, and we were soaked to the bone. We might as well have not had an umbrella, just soaked. And my skirt was elastic, and it started slipping on the way back. So my companion's walking behind me with her umbrella, and she finally just kind of pulls my skirt up and just walks behind me really tight until I can get back. And again, just wringing water out of our clothes. And our mission president used to be very strict. He's like, don't go home and change into your pajamas and do planning. Like, stay in your proselyting clothes, and then do your nightly planning and everything. But that was the one time where we were just like, we're not going to sit down like this. So we had to change before doing our planning. So rain is kind of the biggest thing there, and it can just kind of spring up and then disappear as fast as it came. But it's fun. It's all fun. Throughout my mission, I used to write home to my mom, and I'm like, "Oh, I should have prepared more." And she'd be like, "I don't know what you could have done to prepare more. Like, you went to seminary, you did religion classes. Like, I wasn't able to take one of the mission prep classes through BYU. I don't know if that would have made much of a difference or not. On the mission, I was like, oh, I should have done that. Like, it would have helped me so much. But now I'm like, I don't know if it would have helped that much. Because I feel like you get there and it's just kind of, you have to adapt. Each mission is different, so no matter what you learn, you always have to change it. Maybe physically, because on our mission we walked. You walk everywhere. You almost never take public transportation. I mean, you do every now and then, but you need that money for food too. So we would just walk everywhere. And at first, I would sometimes have trouble keeping up with my companion, just because it's just hills and up and down, and you're just walking for, I don't even know how long, hours you're just walking. So maybe more physical preparation. Although I feel like walking around campus, it kind of gave me some practice, and so it wasn't as big of a deal as it might have been if I'd gone straight from home to the mission. Spiritually, I think it would have been good if I had studied Preach My Gospel more beforehand, just to have a better idea of what was in it, because I didn't even touch it until I was practically in the NTC. So if I had studied a bit more, but again, I feel like I don't know that there's much that can prepare you, because the mission, you can do things to prepare, but I feel like no matter what, you get there and you're going to have to adjust, and you learn and you change study patterns, learn how to study, and just kind of I don't know. I honestly don't know if there's really much that can be done to prepare besides just reading your scriptures, getting familiar with Preach My Gospel, and just praying for help and just praying to know what you need to do. If I was to give myself advice, I would say don't dwell on the mission too much. Because it's easy when you get back. I feel like on the mission, I had a lot of experiences. I had a lot of good experiences and a lot of bad. But because it's so much just go, go, go every day, you don't really have time to emotionally, mentally process everything you're feeling and everything that's happening. And so sometimes after the mission, that kind of comes out and your brain starts kind of remembering things and like, okay, well, let's process this now. Like a year and a half after it's happened. And you'll always find things that you could have done better, and you'll always have things where like, oh, I wish I had done that. But someone told me, a friend of mine who's also an RM told me that you just, if you had done everything perfectly on the mission, there would have been no point in going. I mean, you're there to learn and you're there to figure things out. The missionary you are when you leave the MTC, it's not the same missionary you are when you leave to go home. And just kind of keeping that in mind, that you grow and you learn, and even after the mission, you keep growing and learning. So just be nice to yourself and try not to be too hard on yourself once you get back. Don't rush yourself either. My family was really nice to me, so when I got back home, I just kind of stayed in the house for the first couple of days, because just on the mission, you just give so much of yourself, and you're just constantly putting yourself out there. And so being home, I was like, hey, I just want to be with my family and me, and just kind of not have to talk to anybody or do anything or have any obligations. And so having a couple days like that where it was just, okay, it's just me, and just kind of relaxing for the first time in a year and a half. So be nice to yourself. If you don't feel like you're up to a movie the first night you get back, then don't watch a movie. Just wait till you feel up to it. If you don't feel like you can go out on a date after you've been back for a month, then don't push it. Just be nice to yourself and just go with how you feel and take it a little bit at a time, or a lot at a time, but just whatever works for you. What works for one return missionary doesn't work for all of them. This was when I was in the capital. And what happens is they have something called a feira, which is like kind of an open air market. And like 5 a.m, people will come and set up booths with all these fruits and vegetables and things that they're selling. I even saw goldfish being sold there once, like everything you can imagine. And you can like barter down the prices and stuff. And we would go because our mission president said, if you have one in your area, go, because then you'll be known around the neighborhood, and that will help out a lot. And so we're at the fair. Me and my companion, she's from Argentina. I'm American. This is during the World Cup. Brazilians don't like Argentinians, and they think I'm German, and it's just kind of an interesting situation. And so we get there, and when people notice us, they see that they just think that we're American. And so this one guy starts kind of yelling out in English. He's like, "Oh, you are so beautiful," and da da da, like, "Hello." And I'm like, and I just speak Portuguese. I'm like, "Hi, like, how are you?" And I go to shake his hand, and he goes to hug me. I'm like, "Oh, no, sorry, we're missionaries, we can't hug men." And he's like, "Oh, okay," and he shakes my hand. Just kind of this like big personality guy. And we start trying to talk to him about the gospel, right? He's like, "Oh, I am also a preacher," or whatever. And he gives us his business card for his evangelical services or something. And then I don't even remember how we got to this conversation, but he was asking like how we learned Portuguese. And we're just like, "Oh, well, we studied it a bit, and Heavenly Father really helps." And then he just kind of says something, but it's complete gibberish. We just look at him, and he's like, "Oh, do you not know? Like, it is the gift of, like, the tongue of the angels. Like, if you have the Spirit with you, you will speak the tongue of angels." And he just starts going off in this gibberish, and we're staring at him, and we're thinking to ourselves, like, how are we going to get out of this? Like, he's not stopping, and we have no idea what's going on. And just then, thank goodness, Heavenly Father Center, one of the members of the church was off to the side buying something, and she saw us, and she's like, "Oh, sisters, how are you?" And she came over, we're like, "Oh, hi." So we go over to hug her and greet her, right? And she whispers, she's like, "Oh, good job, sisters," like doing some proselyting. So we got good rap with the members, because they're like, "Oh, look at the sisters talking to everybody." And she got us out of there because, once we turned around after we finished greeting her, he had gone back to his fruit or something. And we're like, "Oh, okay, we're going to keep going." So that was fun. It's an interesting experience. I was in the capital during the World Cup, which was, like I said, with an Argentinian. It was an interesting experience. Nothing bad happened, fortunately. Though we did see, so we kind of have I feel like every area has kind of like a ghetto area in it. And so there was kind of that ghetto area, but that's where most of our investigators were, so we went there most. But like at night, those nights leading up to the World Cup, like Brazil, because there's the days that Brazil plays, and those were the days that we had to stay at home most of the day. And like those days leading up to Brazil's games, like it was crazy at night. They're like everybody's partying, and like there's like music playing and not good music, and so we kind of stayed away from there during those times of the World Cup. But one time I remember we had stayed inside during the day. I think it was the day after Brazil lost, because, so if you don't know this already, Brazil lost badly to Germany during the World Cup. I know nothing about sports, but I know about soccer because of this. It was 7-1, and it was embarrassing. It was a national humiliation. It was terrible. You know what they said? The only thing worse could have been if Argentina had beat them. Because Argentina winning, Brazil's own country, that just would have been bad. But, and everybody was very unhappy. And so we're inside our apartment, and we weren't watching the game. We're just studying and cleaning the house. The house got so clean during the World Cup, and catching up on like our area book files and stuff. And the game, like, it keeps going, and the entire neighborhood is silent. Like, not even dogs are barking. Everybody in Brazil has a dog, but not even the dogs are barking. It's just silent. And then kind of after, like, we're like, hey, the game should have ended by now, but it was still quiet. We're like, what happened? Like, what's going on? And you could just kind of feel this uneasiness in the air. Well, the next day we found out what happened, and the next day we went on the street of one of the streets of this ghetto area, and they had hung a bunch of like plastic, like just like little strips of plastic, like in blue and in green and the colors of Brazil and everything, and just like on these lines from the different houses. And we went down one of these streets, and they had been cut down, and there was this like melted pile of plastic in the middle of the road, and we're like, okay, somebody's not happy. We're gonna keep going. And they're very passionate about their sports. Very, very, very passionate, especially about soccer, especially about men's soccer. So that was interesting. So I was in this middle of nowhere area, like middle of nowhere, and it had been really rough. It was kind of known as like the area where they either sent just kind of the slacker missionaries there, or else they sent like the really hardworking missionaries because like nobody else could deal with it. It was just really kind of rough, and it was just a branch. There weren't a lot of members. And when I got there, I was opening up a third area. So there's a city, it was called Itapetininga, and there were 2 branches, one companionship of sisters in each branch. When I got there, they had just switched to sisters like a couple of transfers ago, and I was opening up a second area in one of the branches. So now it was 3 parts of the city. I had 3 transfers left when that happened. After 2 transfers of working, we had like these elect people. We were super excited. We're like, we're gonna have 6 baptisms, like it's gonna be awesome. And then 4 days after the final transfer, and so I had 4 weeks left in the mission, one of the secretaries called. 2 of the sisters were emergency transferred out. They closed our area, and I got transferred to the other side of the city. So I didn't even know, that was the complete other branch. I didn't even know any of the members. I'd been living with the sisters, so I kind of knew what they had told us, and they hadn't had a lot of positive things to say about the area. My companion was upset, and it was just kind of super discouraging. Just 4 weeks left. I'm like, what are we going to do? We're leaving all these investigators behind, and like it was going to the other branch. Like it was just, you have to learn the area, new map, new area book, new everything. And I remember our first day, like it was supposed to be a weekly planning session. I think we like proselyted for 4 hours that day, because the rest of the time we were just sitting there with the area book, all the papers spread out, trying to figure out what was going on. The sisters hadn't really had time to leave much behind, so there were some things that weren't updated. It's crazy. But we just kind of kept working, and I kind of dragged my companion behind me, and I'm like, no, I'm going to finish strong. It's the last 4 weeks. If the Lord's going to do this, then you know what? We're just going to make the best of it. And we just were not having any luck. I mean, we had a lot of first appointments. The way it works, you have a ton of first appointments, and then some second appointments, and then very few third appointments, and then maybe from there comes a baptism. And so we had a ton of first appointments and like 0 second appointments. And so just every day we're just finding new investigators, but we were never able to find them again, or they didn't want anything afterwards, or just they were old men who just wanted to talk about how their religion was right and ours was wrong. So it was a discouraging last 4 weeks, and I was kind of being a drama queen and being like, what's the last 4 weeks? Like, what is this? Like, this is my mission. What the heck? And, but we worked really hard. And what happened was there was a guy who was a friend of a bunch of members from the first branch. He lived in the area of the second branch, but he would go like almost every Sunday to the first branch and visit church with them. And his friend had given him a Book of Mormon, had given him like the Gospel Principles book, and he'd read like everything already. He's a very intelligent man. He was a professor at the local university. And we'd been nagging the other sisters before when we were in the first branch. We're like, you guys got to meet with him. Like, he's in your area. And they're like, he won't give us his address. Like, we can never catch up with him because he's always in your branch. Like, they got his phone number, but like they were never able to meet with him. He didn't want to have them out to his house because he lived alone. So they couldn't go alone. And then like not even just a few days after we'd gotten into the area, his friend, who was a member, called us, and she's like, hey sisters, his name was Ellison, he'll be at my her business, whatever, like such and such day, I want you to come talk with him. And so we got an appointment with him, and we met with him I think only 2 or 3 times in those few weeks. And both times we met with him, like, it just kind of came down to the issue of repentance, where like he was ready to be baptized. It's just he didn't feel he was ready. If that makes sense. He couldn't forgive himself for his past. And so we worked with him, we talked with him, and the elders came, our zone leaders came, interviewed him. And the way our mission president had said that if there was anything that wasn't taught at the time of the interview, the zone leaders could teach it, finish the interview, and then still sign off the baptismal form. And so they did that. And the way we understood it, he had agreed to be baptized Sunday. We're super excited. We can't get a hold of him. Saturday night, we can't contact him at all. We're kind of freaking out, but we're like, he'll be baptized. Sunday we get there, he's not going to be baptized. He's like, I'm just not ready. It's not going to happen. And I was leaving Tuesday. And we talked with him in the chapel for like a half hour after church. And I don't even remember what I said. I just quoted a bunch of scriptures, and I was just like, you're ready. Like, just go home. And I started crying, which is kind of embarrassing because I didn't want to guilt him into being baptized. But I think it helped him kind of see that we were serious about this. And finally we challenged him. We're like, go home, pray, read the Book of Mormon, and pray and ask Heavenly Father if you should be baptized. He said, okay, I'll call you later and let you know how it goes. And that was, maybe around noon? 5 o'clock, we had a meeting with the ward council, with the branch. He calls at the beginning of the council, and we're like, oh, we have to take this. We got to go. So we go out in the hallway. And he's like, hi, sisters. So I've been thinking, is there any way we could have a baptism tomorrow night? We're like, yes, there is. He's like, great. How about this time? And we're like, perfect. And who would you like to baptize you? Oh, so-and-so, Irmão Freitas. Oh, okay, great. Congratulations, brother. You've made the right choice. Like, we're so happy for you. And he hung up, and we started jumping up and down in the hall. We're like, yes! We're going to ward council, and we're like, we're having a baptism tomorrow. Who can be the witnesses? We get 2 of the brothers in there, like, volunteered to be witnesses. So P-Day happened, and then at 6 o'clock, we had his baptism. And Tuesday morning, I took the bus out to go back home, to go to the mission home to leave. And that was huge. And I've been really lucky to keep in touch with missionaries from my mission. And from what I've heard, up till a few months ago, he's still going strong. He finally got his record switched because he still kept going to the first branch, which he wasn't supposed to. So he got his record switched finally, so that he could go to the first branch with all his friends and everything. And he's able to get the priesthood and get a calling there. From what I've heard, he's super strong. He's always raises his hand to talk during gospel principles and like give answers and stuff. So it was really big, because sometimes you work and you work and you work and you feel like you're not going anywhere. And then sometimes the Lord just kind of gives you a And he lets you have that kind of moment where you're like, okay, like it was worth it. Like things are happening. So it was great. It was wonderful. You're really lucky to be going to the Sao Paulo North Mission. It is an incredible mission. And it's hard. You're going to have to work hard. But you're going to have incredible leaders who are going to guide you through everything. And you're going to have wonderful companions. You're going to have hard companions. You're going to have all kinds. You're going to meet wonderful people who are going to inspire you. You're going to meet people who are going to teach you what to not be like. You're going to meet just all sorts of people. Your vision of the world is going to change. You're going to find out that what you think now about the world and about people, that it's going to change. It's going to be different. And you're going to laugh. You're going to cry. You're going to get not blisters, but you're going to get sore knees from praying so much. You are going to get calluses on your knees. That will probably happen. You're going to walk for miles. You're going to just talk with everybody and do everything you can to spread the gospel. And the Lord is the one who's calling you out there. He's the one who's inspired you to serve a mission. He's the one who inspired the brethren to call you to Sao Paulo North. And so that's the place where you're going to learn the most, or you're going to be able to do the most good. And just try not to focus too much on how many baptisms you have, but focus on changing yourself and on being the best possible missionary you can, and just leave the rest in the Lord's hands. As long as we do our part, then we leave the rest up to the Lord. My trainer once told me we've been working really hard all day and we hadn't had a single lesson, and I was getting really discouraged. And I told the sister, I said, I'm really worried because we only have a few hours left to proselyte and we haven't met anybody. And she told me, don't worry, sister. Let the Lord worry about it. It's not our problem, it's His, because we've been working our butts off. We've been doing everything we can. And we just got to leave it in His hands. And as long as you remember that, then everything's going to turn out just the way He planned, and everything's going to turn out fine. And remember that everybody has their agency. You could give the best testimony ever. You could give the perfect lesson ever. And they might still say no. But that's not your fault. Just do everything you can. Pray as much as you can and read the scriptures as much as you can. The scriptures are the Word of God. You'll find inspiration there. You'll find comfort there. Sometimes just reading them, you'll be able to feel the Spirit and feel God's love. And that might be all you need. But the mission, it's going to be the best 18 months of your life, or 2 years. It's going to be life-changing. And you're going to look back on it, and the lessons you learn there, they're going to apply to the rest of your life. So just remember that this is God's church. This is the only church that has the fullness of the gospel. So it has everything. You were called of God. Joseph Smith was a prophet. And President Monson is leading the church today, and he really is a prophet of God. And think about what that means. And think about how much your brothers and sisters in Brazil need to hear that right now. And that's what you're going to do. You're going to go there and you're going to tell them that God called a prophet today. You're going to tell them that the Book of Mormon is the Word of God, and you're going to find people who are going to love the Book of Mormon. You're going to help them learn to love it just as much as you do. And the Book of Mormon is incredible. And you are so, so blessed to be able to serve in Sao Paulo North. Good luck. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
So flying out there, I was super scared. I was all alone on the plane. I was sitting outside waiting to board the plane, and I was scared to death. I was like, I'm going to a foreign country all by myself. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to get lost. Something's going to happen. And this awesome guy came up, missionary. His name was Elder Carney, Danny Carney. And we became really good friends as we found out we were going to the same mission. We were on the same flights. We were headed out together. So that was really comforting to me, to just know that the Lord was looking out for me. And then getting there, we all thought we were cool. We thought, we learned some Portuguese in the MTC. And the van driver who took us from the airport to our mission president's house was Brazilian, obviously. And I said something simple to him, tudo bem, como está, how are you? And he said something back, and I have no idea what he said, and it blew me away. I was like, okay, well, I guess I don't speak Portuguese. And it kind of, it surprised me a little bit that I didn't understand anything, but I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to work through it, and I'm going to get to work and really learning the language. And my trainer was actually the biggest worry I had. My mission president was really nice. I mean, this big guy, so he scared us all a little bit, but it was fun getting to know him. However, it was my trainer that was worrying me the most. I was worried that I wasn't going to get a good trainer. I was going to have a rough time, or that he wouldn't speak Portuguese and I wouldn't learn anything. And I remember, as my mission president had interviewed us all, he invited us all in to see who our trainers were going to be. And I just looked at the picture of my trainer, and I just felt this calm inside. I said, everything's going to be great. And he was Brazilian. He was from Rio de Janeiro. And it was just super fun working with him. It was hard getting out there and just walking probably 10 to 12 miles a day, and often hot or raining or whatever. But I didn't always understand everything that people were saying. I didn't always know what to say, but it was just fun. And it was good to know that I was a missionary serving the Lord and doing what I was needed to do. So Sao Paulo, the city itself, is huge. I mean, the geographical boundaries have 12 million people. The metropolitan area, including a couple other cities that are basically all one big city, are 20 million people. And it's huge. There are people everywhere in the center of Sao Paulo. And there are actually 5 missions in the city of Sao Paulo that break up the city. And then in the state of Sao Paulo, there are another 4 for a total of 9. And Sao Paulo North is really special because it was actually the first mission in Brazil. It's the one that eventually got split up into tons of the 34 that are there in Brazil now. So we celebrated, while I was in my mission, we celebrated our 80th anniversary as a mission. It's a long time. So the work has been going on there for a long time, especially in Sao Paulo. And there are really old families there that you would meet, and they show up and say, yeah, my family's been members of the church since whatever year, 80 years ago, 60 years ago. You're like, wow, that's crazy. My family hasn't even been in that church that long. And it was just fun to meet all those people. Very religious. Lots of them are either Catholic or evangelicals, and lots of them are very devout followers. You will find lots of people who say they belong to a certain religion, but never go, but most of them are very religious people. The mission itself is about half and half. Half of the mission is really the city. It's concentrated people, houses, workplaces, factories, all that stuff. And then you get eventually farther out, and you get a lot of the countryside as well. So I got to serve in a little bit of both. Sao Paulo North actually gained a lot of that countryside about 3 years ago. It used to be pretty much just city. And right before I got there, they split the mission and made the West Mission. And where Sao Paulo North used to have the temple in Sao Paulo, in the area offices, they actually just put that in the West Mission, which made it really interesting for us. I served in the mission office for about 4 months, and I mean, our mission president was in a completely different mission. He lived an hour and a half away from us, so it's kind of hard to see him sometimes, but it was really cool to go into the city, see the culture there. Everyone's running around, they're busy, but still very hospitable. The people are very loving, and you walk up to the door, you don't knock, you clap. And you'll go up and clap your hands, and they'll come running out and say, oh, hey, how are you doing? Do you need some water? Have you had dinner yet? Would you like to be fed? And most of the time you decline, but the people are just open and loving and want to meet you a lot of the time. You'll find people who reject you, and you'll but a lot of times they're very open people. And you get farther out on the countryside, and people are just slow. They've got their farms a lot of time. There'll be small suburban areas, and it's just fun to see the differences. They take a very different approach to life. Still very hospitable, very loving and caring, but also very calm, laid back. Sao Paulo North especially is a very high baptizing mission. When I was there, we were starting to hit about 300 baptisms a month, and now I've been getting emails and stuff from friends saying they've started to hit around 400 a month. And it's incredible just the rate at which people will come into the church. There is a very common challenge of just keeping people. People have challenges with cigarettes, with drugs a lot of the time. It's hard for them to leave everything they've done. A lot of times their families will be resilient as well and will want them to change churches or anything. But people there have so much faith that they're often very willing. And it's difficult to find those few people who are ready and just willing to go, okay, I'm going to put it all past me and move on and find this new correct path. But they are out there. And Sao Paulo itself is a very special place because there are so many people that you can just talk and talk and talk, and you can find so many people who are ready to hear the gospel. One of the most successful things I found was focusing on families. The people of Sao Paulo are very family oriented. You get a lot of people in Sao Paulo who have moved down from way up in the north of Brazil. And though that culture especially is very family oriented. So you start talking to them and explaining how your family can be together forever, about eternal marriage, and people catch on to that a lot. They want to be with their families. Church itself in Sao Paulo, there are tons of words and stakes. I mean, in a city of, we had a city of 200,000 people, I think, that had 5 or 6 stakes by the time I left. And each one of those stakes would have, on average, 5 or 6 wards that had, on average, 100 people. I mean, sometimes a little less. 50 to 100 people was about the norm for a ward there. And there is a ton of growth. I mean, you have a mission that's not terribly huge. It can take a long time to travel from one side to the other, but the major concentration of people is in the city of Sao Paulo. And with 200 missionaries in an area like that, getting on average 2 baptisms per missionary is a lot of people. And you have a lot of old families that invite new people in. Depending on where you go, you can get a lot of member help, and they just love to share the gospel. There are very much the challenges of finding people still. Talking with everyone you see is definitely the best approach I've come across. Knocking doors was always hard because as much as people would be hospitable and let you in, they were often busy, and they'd either ask for a different time or say, no, please don't come back. We have our religion and we don't want to hear anything else. That was often tough to hear as we saw these people that we wanted to help, that we loved. Especially after meeting so many other Brazilians, we just loved the people. And it was hard to see them turn us away a lot of the time. The leadership in the church in Brazil is so strong. Every bishop that I saw, especially every stake president, was just focused. And it's interesting that Brazil, and especially Sao Paulo, all their leaders are very missionary oriented. They want new people. They want to work with the missionaries. They want to feed the missionaries. They want to do activities that'll bring new people into the church. They are very helpful, and they just love doing missionary work. So that's one of the things I found most interesting about the leadership in particular. I served from August of 2013 until July of 2015. And I started out in a suburb of a city just outside of Sao Paulo. The suburb was called Amador Bueno. right outside the city of Itapevi. And I served there for about 3 months, and then I moved on to a city way far away from the capital. I took a 2-hour bus to a city, and then took another probably hour trip out by bus to what was called Itapetininga, which was a city of about 100,000 people. We had 2 areas there and 2 branches. It was really cool. I stayed there for another 3 months before moving to a suburb of Sao Paulo itself. It was called Vila Medeiros. And I stayed there for 4 months before moving on to a suburb of a big city way outside of Sao Paulo, about 2 hours away, the city was called Sorocaba, and I served in Vila Progresso inside of Sorocaba. From there, after 3 months, I think, I moved back into the city of Sao Paulo, went to a different suburb called Tucuruvi, which is where the mission office was. So I was a records and referral secretary for 4 months, and I served in that part of Sao Paulo for a while, that neighborhood. And before moving on to a city just north of Sao Paulo, about 20 minutes away, called Perus. So I served in Perus for about 3 months, and then moved on to my last area, which was called Arçoiaba da Serra, which was another city about a little over two hours away from Sao Paulo itself. So I moved around quite a bit. I shuffled in between what we called the interior, which was the countryside, and then back into the city of Sao Paulo, and I just kind of flipped back and forth a lot. It was a lot of fun. Brazilians are extremely bold. They're often like Europeans in that respect, where they just say what they think, and there is often little to no filter. So what they're saying is their honest opinion, and this makes them extremely hospitable, one, and it also makes them extremely blunt sometimes. So they are extremely loving people, open-hearted and caring. They will just take you in, make you one of their own. They will offer you as much as they have as soon as you walk in. They often have fruit trees growing outside in their houses, and they'll say, well, take some. Just take as many as you need, as you want. Just go ahead. And so they're very open. And it's carried into lots of their physical gestures as well. I mean, we'll go up to people and we'll shake their hands, maybe give a hug or something. But in Brazil, you always hug everyone. Obviously, as missionaries, we only shook hands with girls and women, but the guys, we would always hug. And anytime a girl is involved, you always kiss each other on the cheek as well. You'll touch cheeks and just kiss the air after you've hugged or during the hug. And it's something a little different. Brazilians are much more touchy-feely than Americans, and it's something that I had to adjust to a ton. I often was very, no need to touch me. One of the jokes I found was, for example, in America, it's a foreign family in a movie theater because they'll sit right next to you. Americans will always leave at least one seat gap in a movie theater or any place like that, for example. However, Brazilians, they're all family. They'll come up, as they're talking, they'll tap you on the shoulder, on the elbow, they'll grab your arm, they'll kick you with their feet or whatever, and just do these little taps and stuff. They're signs of affection and just very much culture as well. It was something that I took a lot of getting used to, but eventually I just kind of assimilated it, and I got very much used to it. And I loved being able to go up to someone and give them a hug and just hold their arm and talk to them, look them in the eyes, tap them every once in a while, just because it was normal. They can also be very opinionated and very blunt. So if you come up and they are from a different church and they don't want anything to do with you, they will tell you. And they will yell at you and tell you to get out of their house. Sometimes they'll even try to be polite, and if you ask for a drink of water, they'll go get you it. But then sometimes they want you gone, and they'll make it very apparent. There was one time I was on an in exchange with one of our assistants to the president. And we went up to this house, and he said, "I've got this." And so he asked for a drink of water. The lady came out with water, and we started to sip, and we just started to chat with her. It was a very calming conversation starter. We didn't carry water with us a lot of the time because we would just go from house to house, and we'd say, "Hey, can we get some water?" And everyone would always come out with water. And this one lady in particular brought us out the water, and as we started to chat with her, she snapped on us. And she just started yelling, "What are you doing? You came out here asking for water, and now you're trying to talk with me. I don't have time for this. I need to go do things inside. Give me your cups," and head off. And so we'd often find ourselves in these kind of, not necessarily awkward situations, but just kind of rough spots where we're like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess you don't want to talk to us." And we go off. But yeah, so they're very, very open people. So starting out in the city of Sao Paulo, it is very tightly packed. And everyone knows Sao Paulo for its neighborhoods. Everyone knows that Tucuruvi is a slightly fancier neighborhood, especially if you get further into downtown. Villa Sonia, for example, is a much higher class place. And then you have lots of other places that are known as slums or favelas. For example, Villa Paraíso is one of the biggest favelas or slums that are in Sao Paulo. The areas I served in typically were more middle class to higher class. And it's very much characterized where it's almost like its own little city where it's set up. You'll have a big street down the middle with a couple lanes going each direction for cars, lined with shops on either side of every kind. That's where it's where you'll go for, if you need pictures taken, if you need groceries, if you need to go to the butcher shop, if you need to go to the bakery. Lots of those places are normally lined up on one big street, and then the houses are surrounding it. And houses will normally have much narrower streets, and then people's houses will be, if you look at the front of it, it's not very big. On average, about 20 feet across, and then they'll have plots of land that go back pretty far. And then, so Brazilians typically, they have their gate or their garage right in front of the street. There's no sidewalk or anything. You normally, rarely are there sidewalks. But you go in and people have their gate right there, which is why you have to clap, because unless they have a doorbell, they're not going to hear you knocking. So you have to clap through their gate. And then they'll build upwards. So you'll find lots of houses that are 2-3 stories tall. I saw some that were 4 or 5 even. And they'll build it little bits at a time. All Brazilians actually do it like this, where they'll build their floor level, and then as they get more money, they'll start just adding bricks on. All the houses are made out of these huge bricks, and they just stack them up until they finally have a 3-story house or whatever, something that'll fit their family's needs. Each area is going to be a little different. Each neighborhood is going to have its own special features. For example, the kinds of jobs you find people doing in different neighborhoods will be completely different. If you go to a richer neighborhood, which will have more nice, tall apartment buildings, like you find condos here in the States, just skyscraper kind of things, they'll often be doing more administrative jobs. They'll go work at big companies. One of the big ones we found was the airline Azul, which here is actually JetBlue. It's the same company. And as you get into slightly poorer neighborhoods, then people start having much more typical jobs. We've found lots of carpenters. There are lots of people with very, very traditional kind of jobs as we would find them here in the States. Carpenters, grocers, butchers, bakers. You have lots of people who maybe fix watches and have their own little shop. You often see people, especially the women, will have their own little out-of-home stores, and they'll either sell candies or chocolate-covered strawberries, or these little foods we call pastels, which are just fried dough kind of thing filled with cheese or meat or some other things. And They'll sell it all out of their house to get money. And so a lot more just typical kind of everyday jobs. Crime varies a lot as well. If you go to a richer neighborhood, you're not going to find hardly any at all, because all the richer people will live in these condos that are shut off. There's a security guard at the gate. They won't let you in unless you telephone up and the person says, yeah, they can come in. So it's a lot more restrictive, which means there's a lot less crime. However, you do find quite a bit of crime in other areas. The police aren't always around, so we saw, and I had some friends even who experienced breaking and entering, robberies. There were often quite a bit of drug use around, and you could smell marijuana in the air. Transportation-wise, it was normally always the bus, especially if it was in our area. The areas in the city of Sao Paulo tend to be smaller, so you don't take as much transportation, but when you do, it'll normally be a city bus. If you're going in between neighborhoods across Sao Paulo, you always take the train. We used to, especially going to the temple, we got to go to the temple every 3 months or so. So we would hop on a bus, go to the bus station. From there, we could transfer to a train and ride out to the temple. And that's pretty much what everyone uses. And there are quite a few people with cars, though they don't always use them. Most people will, especially if they're going to work, will take the bus or a train. And Brazilians are kind of special where they don't always live where they're working. Especially if they're poorer and it's harder to find a job, they'll often travel 3 hours a day to go to work. I heard of some people who would travel that far. Normally it's closer to an hour or something, which I think would immensely lengthen your work day if you had to travel an hour, 3 hours to your work, and then come back for another 1 to 3 hours. But it's kind of their culture and what they do. If they find a job cleaning houses that is going well on the other side of town, they will take a train for an hour or two every day to go to work, cleaning houses, and then return home so they can bring money to their family. There are lots of single parents, especially single mothers who have children, and those especially will always go out of their way cleaning houses or doing something to just get money for their family. So Sao Paulo, one of the things it's apparently well known for is its pizza. And I thought it was special because pizza you can find every shape and form. You can find these cheap, nasty pizzas for, in our money, $1 or $2 for an entire pizza. And it's not very good. But you can also find these pizzas which would be $20 easy for one pizza, and they are really good. So you have to be careful about what you get, but Sao Paulo is well known for its pizza, said to have some of the best pizza in the world. And you can find pizza there in every shape and form. I mean, you can find pizzas with peas on it. You have your standard, obviously, pepperoni, cheese, maybe Canadian bacon and pineapple or something. But you also get scrambled eggs on your pizza. You get peas. You get 6 cheese pizzas, which are incredible. It's a lot to handle at once. A lot of grease. But, they just go all out. They'll put about anything on it. As far as places to see, we didn't have a lot of time on our PJs to go out. We were often sitting at home. I washed my clothes by hand for pretty much the entire time. If we had a washing machine, it was very simple and would just spin around. That's it. So, and there were several areas where I had to do all of it by hand, rubbing it and getting all the dirt out. So we didn't have tons of time to go out and do things. As for a while in my mission, we were told to just kind of stick at home more. There wasn't much to do around. But every once in a while, we got permission to go to, there's a street in Sao Paulo called the 25th of March, 25 de Maio. And it's a huge retail street. People from all around will buy things in bulk and sell it for super cheap. And we went there for ties a lot because we could find tie sets. I love to get these tie sets with cufflinks and a tie and a pocket handkerchief for just a couple bucks. And I mean, you could find anything there. Most of it was pirated or ripped off or some kind of knockoff brand or version. So lots of it was fake, but it was just fun to go down there. And in that area, you can find the tallest building in Sao Paulo, the Banespa, and you go to the top and you get to look around and you see the city sprawling out in every direction around you. And it's pretty cool. It's a sight to behold. One of my later cities I served in was called Perus. And Perus actually means turkeys. So it's the city of turkeys in Sao Paulo. And it was about 20 to 40 minutes by train north of Sao Paulo. So we would always ride up there. And it's pretty isolated. One of the things about Sao Paulo is it's incredibly hilly. I spent lots of my mission either going up or going down. And when you're walking 10 to 12 miles a day, it gets to be a lot. And my shoes were just worn out. And I'd known they were going to, so I'd bought nice $150 shoes, a couple pairs of them, these thick soles, just industrial grade dress shoes. And several times I had to take them to a shoe store. Some little guy who had a shop set up on the street, and he would tack on a new sole. Lots of times it was airplane tire, so he would nail it on or sew it onto your shoe, and you'd have an entirely new sole of your shoe. It was really interesting. And that's one of the typical jobs you find. These smaller cities like this around Sao Paulo were often very much like the city, where tightly packed, narrow streets a lot of the time. One or two main streets where all the stores were, which was pretty much the center of the city, and then sprawling suburbs around it. In these suburbs, you'll find a lot of times cheap apartment housing, which won't have security guards or gates or anything, but it's just a way that the government has found to give houses to people. So they'll make these buildings and they'll sell them away for pretty cheap to families, so they can have somewhere nicer to live. Because there are lots of parts where you find people living in cardboard boxes or these cheap shanty huts made out of sheet metal or something. So Brazil has done quite a bit of work on trying to get people into nicer housing, and you'll find a lot of these apartments kind of settings. In these smaller cities, there are still buses. Bus is the main form of transportation. If we went to district meeting or anything, we'd take the bus to the neighboring city, or we worked in Perus especially. There was another smaller city that was part of our area, so we'd take the bus in between there, or we'd find some member who was willing to drive us and go with us on some visits. And you got to be really proficient with the bus. You had to know where each one was going, where you had to get off, and or else you were going to miss your stop. And there was one time where we missed our stop completely, and we wound up walking home for the next 3 hours. So that was fun. These smaller cities still have this kind of big city feel, the same kind of feel you get in Sao Paulo. Not quite as packed or busy. You won't find the hordes of people you'll find going down some streets in Sao Paulo, but it's still quite busy. People are walking around, and they've all got the hustle and bustle of their days. You'll still find those typical kind of jobs where people are butchers or grocers or carpenters, kind of stuff like that. But it's just not quite the same huge feel to it, because it is a much smaller city, and it'll normally be much greener, a lot more trees around, lots more parks in the cities. And a lot of these are set, Perus especially was set in a small mountain range that was just north of Sao Paulo. So we'd actually get to go, we took a couple P-days where we hiked up to the top of this mountain and we could see around, and it's just green. Tons of these dark green trees and forest and stuff, and it's beautiful. A sight to behold, truly. My last area was called Arçoiaba da Serra. And it was very much just a small podunk town. Typical setup, you have one big main street. In the very middle of the city you have a Catholic church in front of a square, a little park, and then everything else is centered around that. This was a huge area. I had a couple other areas where we had to take a bus to neighboring cities to go visit people sometimes, and this was one of them. It was cool. People would ride their horses down the middle of the street like it was a car, or they'd sit in their little buggies and have the horse pull them. You'd find lots of farmers, lots of countryside people. It was interesting, the dynamics of it as well, because in the middle of the city, you'd have all the suburbs around it and a little poorer section. And people were very slow. They're laid back, relaxed with life. They'd take interest in what you had to say a lot, but always had some reservations, and were always very fixed in their ways a lot of time. We're just kind of like, you know what, I'm living life. I like it. I don't have any problems. I'm good to go. But outside of the city, you started getting a lot richer. And people would have these huge estates, giant houses on tons of land, and sometimes in gated communities, sometimes just out in the middle of nowhere. And you could find some very wealthy people. Lots of members actually had houses like this where they were in a gated community, a gated neighborhood, or they were in just this little plot of land where they had built up their huge house. And so you find a lot of difference. It was funny to see, whereas in Sao Paulo the center of it often was much richer and you got out and it was a little poorer. In these cities out in the middle of nowhere, it was often poorer in the center and got richer as you went out, which was just kind of cool demographics of it. I still very much use the bus. There was less of a bus system in the city, so there were a couple areas where we could go out to by bus and then come back, but often it was walking, and it would sometimes take us 20 to 30 minutes to walk between one neighborhood to the other down these all dirt roads, walking through suburbs and stuff. Crime rates in these cities tend to be much lower. You'd still find every once in a while somebody blew up a bank or something crazy, but normally it was very, very calm, very tranquil, and there wasn't much going on. But they were beautiful cities, tons of greenery, very nice people, even though they were often very laid back and very slow. They were just very loving and hospitable as well. It was fun to just walk around and see all the countryside and see a very much different style of living. People here often just kind of did their thing. All of the state of Sao Paulo, so all these little places and the big city as well, were often very dry, but they'd have their raining seasons as well. And you'd have several weeks of rain sometimes. I remember there were several days where I stepped out of the house, and as soon as I put my foot on the street, it was soaking wet. My shoe was full of water, and I just knew, well, the day's going to be like this. I'm going to have wet feet the entire day. And you just set out to work. Umbrellas there weren't very good either. So if you didn't bring an umbrella from home, you were often stuck buying new umbrellas every couple weeks, as they would just break from the wind force or from the rain itself. Other than that, it was often very sunny. Though the sun doesn't beat down quite as much. It's not quite as penetrating, so I never got burned there. I know some people did, but it was pretty rare to get bad burns out in the sun, just because it wasn't bold enough. I don't know. I loved a lot of the Brazilian food. You have your staple, rice and beans. You will eat rice and beans every single day. Occasionally on a Sunday or something, they'll have some spaghetti or something ready for you. And then they'll often have rice and beans on the side as well. So that is your staple. You eat that all the time. In fact, Brazilians often don't consider it a meal, a complete meal, unless there are rice and beans there. And they have tons of traditional little dishes. It's funny. I think people often see America as a very large, obese kind of country, though I don't really find it. Brazilians also kind of are just as chubby as we are oftentimes. And it's funny because America often gets that because of sugar input. And personally, I eat tons of ice cream, pie, whatever. I love my little treats. Whereas Brazil, lots of times you find lots of fried foods that create the same thing. So you find fried little snacks that you can get on the street for cheap. One of my favorites, which was called coxinha, and actually learned how to make them, are these little chicken snack things, I guess. There's a potato-based dough that is filled on the inside with seasoned chicken, shredded chicken, and then some cheese sometimes, and then wrapped up in this very specific teardrop shape, and then breaded and fried, and they are delicious. Something that everyone will grab just as a little snack on the road. Brazil especially has lots of these little snack places because lunch is their main thing. Sometimes you'll have a little bit of breakfast, but lunch was everything. Missionaries especially, we'd eat 2-3 plates sometimes of food, and big plates, so you get quite a bit of food, and then you just eat as much as you could. Lots of times, if I ate breakfast, it was something very small, a piece of bread, an egg or two, maybe some cereal, though I didn't eat tons of cereal on my mission. Most of it was just waiting until lunch, where you would fill up completely, and that would pretty much last you until the next lunch. We didn't stop for dinner a lot of time. We would go right through, and we would often buy little snacks at the bakery or little stores on the side of the road, or we'd go into a grocery store for some little cookies, and just something quick that we can eat on the go, and then just keep working, because there is so much to be done. They have tons of traditional dishes as well, and you will just find every kind of meat imaginable. I used to laugh about it because in the US, you walk into a typical meat section and you see what's normal to us. You see some ground beef, you see some chicken legs, thighs, breasts, you see steak and pork, and maybe a little extra, but nothing very odd outside of that. Whereas in Brazil, if you go down the aisle in a grocery store, you will see cow tongue, you will see chicken feet, you will see intestines and stomach and ears and tails, and they even use cow feet oftentimes. There's a special soup there that they take just above the knee of a cow, and they'll chop it up and put it in a soup, and it's delicious. It's really good. They'll often make one of their main Brazilian dishes is called feijoada. And feijoada is actually a traditional slave dish where long time ago the slaves would they wouldn't have very much meat. All the nice meats would go to their masters, and they would be left with this kind of poor meat. Oftentimes ear, tail, intestines, stomach, and just the fatty parts that people didn't want to eat. And they eventually made it into a soup kind of thing. And so feijoada is black beans and tons of water, and you cook all your meats in that water. So all your meats are very juicy. They're not dry. They're just packed with water, which gives it a very different taste, and also just makes it super heavy. So we'd have feijoada every once in a while, and it's hot, and it stays hot in your stomach, but it's also just weighs you down a ton. So they'd find little different ways, putting in some orange slices or potatoes, and they had some tricks for getting out some of that heaviness you felt and the salt content. But it's a delicious meal, and you find it very hard to walk after eating it. And often I often found that some of my favorite parts of that meal in particular was cowtail. I thought cowtail was delicious. It's just very tender, melts in your mouth. It's a very small part of the animal, obviously, so there's not a ton of it around, but every once in a while you get a good piece, and it's delicious. There were some meats that I was not ready for, that I did not care for, cow stomach especially. I ate a soup once where, he had chopped up stomach along with these big white beans and stuck it in the special soup that they have. It's very typical for the north of Brazil especially. And the soup itself was delicious, the beans, everything. Getting to that meat though was hard to stomach. Well, no pun intended, but just the stomach lining in and of itself has a very weird texture that you're not prepared for. What else? One of the strangest meats I think I ate, and just foods in general, was blood sausage, where they'd take the blood from a cow, all the leftover blood, and they'll often leave it in a basin until it gets pretty thick, and they'll make sausage out of it. And you can season it just right, and it tastes really good. Both that is very categorized with liver as well, where it's just a very rich meat, so it's hard to eat a ton of it, but it's delicious what you do eat. Beyond that, you find everything is based around beans and rice. So you'll sometimes get a meat on the side, a steak or a chicken. Sometimes instead of beans, you'll have what we called stroganoff, and they'd have this tomato-based paste with some cream, and they'd put chicken and seasons and spices and stuff in with it, and you just pour it on top of your rice. Pretty much everything goes on top of your rice. I mean, feijoada, you just pour on top. That other soup with the cow stomach, you just pour on top of rice. Stroganoff as well, pour on top of rice. Pretty much everything does. And they will mix all their food together. So even if you serve yourself sometimes with like rice, and then you put your wet stuff, whatever it is, main on top of that, maybe your salad on the sides, Brazilians will often just mix it all together and eat it as is. So it's a very efficient, I guess, approach to it. And it's something I kind of learned to do a little bit as well. I learned to just kind of mix my food together. Salad in particular was very much different from what we find. There often weren't dressings. They'd often use what I now love to use, which is just a little bit of lime juice, water, and salt poured on top. And salad for them is extremely basic. It's normally lettuce, chopped lettuce, chopped tomatoes, some chopped onions, maybe some cucumbers, maybe. But often it was just those three mixed together and tossed around. You'd find all sorts of different treats on the side of the road. There are always people selling. Brazil has a huge variety of desserts as well. You find these little chocolate, kind of like fudge, called Brigadeiro, and they're delicious. You'll find them made of a coconut base, of a vanilla base, of this chocolate base. You can find cakes of all sort, pies. They love to do puddings and jello, and we've served all sorts of stuff on our missions, especially. Brazilian people love to pamper the missionaries, and they will often give as much as they can. Some of the poorest people, in fact, will just give everything. They will offer to give lunch one time a month for the missionaries, or as much as they can, and they will just give, oftentimes it's something very simple, just rice, beans, a little bit of chicken, but they just give as much as they can to the missionaries. They love them so much. And other times you will find richer families who just go all out, and they will give you some extravagant kind of food and just tons of it as well. In one of my areas, there was a lady, and she just loved to feed the missionaries. And we'd go over and we'd find 2 different kinds of pastas with 2 different sauces. We'd find a huge salad. There would be chicken and steak and what they beef enrolada, which was just, they'd wrap beef around some vegetables, some carrots or something, and stick a toothpick in it and bake it as is. And she would make fried potatoes, French fries on top of that, have several different kinds of drink, and normally a cake and a flan or something. And it was incredible how much food there was. And one of the jokes we have on missions, or especially in Sao Paulo, was that there are always those typical lines that a sister in a ward will say to you. And always be like, "Elder, did you not like my food? Elder, eat more. Oh, I knew so-and-so, Elder, that he used to eat 4 plates of food. You've only eaten 2. Come on, you have to eat more." They'd always tease you about it. And it grew to be just a joke on the mission. We'd always say that. You didn't like my food? What is this? On top of that, Brazilians are well known for their juice as well. And you will find every kind of juice imaginable. I mean, what few people know is cashew, the nut is actually basically the stem of a cashew fruit that is grown a ton in the north of Brazil. And they will make cashew fruit juice. Well, juice the fruit and get a delicious juice out of it. You have guava juice, you have pineapple. They'll just put pineapple in a blender and make juice out of it. You have orange juice all the time. You will find shakes made with bananas. You will find lime juice is extremely popular there. They don't have lemons as much. It's extremely rare to find a lemon, but they make tons of lime juice, and that was one of my favorites. They put some lime juice in, they make it all frothy, maybe put a little cream in there, and tons of sugar, and it was just delicious. You'd have lots of soda as well. Brazilians love their Coca-Cola, and there it's made with pure sugar, and it's a lot better than the Coke we get here in America a lot of the time. And one of their favorite sodas, which is actually one of mine too, it's called Guaraná, and it's a little little red berry that you find mostly in the north of Brazil, and they just export it everywhere. And they make this soda out of it that you can find sometimes here in the States even, but it is delicious. It's nothing like you've ever tried. Brazil is just very rich in fruits, especially. Their land is extremely fertile. Even going to the Amazon rainforest, you see all the variety and stuff, and it's because Brazilian land in and of itself is very fertile. They do not have a great political situation, which has hindered them immensely, but the earth is extremely rich. And one of my favorite treats was called acai. I don't actually know how you say it in English. I think it's acai or maybe it's just acai berry. And they make an ice cream out of it, basically. And you put granola on top of that. You put bananas, strawberries, whatever you want along with it, and it is delicious. It is a cold treat. Brazilians like to play this joke on new missionaries beware, where they will say they're pregnant. And so, elders will walk up into the lunch, and their trainers will have told them, look, when you get to the end of the meal, when you're done, just say, estou grávido, and which means I'm pregnant. And you pat your stomach like you're full or something. And people would go up, and just all the members will laugh because they know it's a trick, they know the joke, and they just die laughing as you say, yeah, I'm pregnant. No, it's okay, I don't need any more food, I'm pregnant. So that was always funny. Brazilians like to play other little jokes like that. Other language mistakes. Just getting used to it at the beginning is often very hard because often your vocabulary is very much more limited than what you're used to in your native language. So you get out there and you're trying to say all these things, you're mixing up words, and one of the other popular mistakes in Portuguese is the difference between coconut and poop, which is very similar. They have the same letters, C-O-C-O. The only difference is coconut will have a special accent on it, a little hat. And so you can either say coco, which is coconut, or you can say coco, which is poop. And it's just the very minute difference in the way you accent the word, which part of it carries the inflection. So it's fun. Probably the rain. Brazil will get periods of rain for a couple weeks where it'll just pour nonstop. And you step off the street, your feet are wet, you know you're going to be soaked the entire day. And sometimes it can be very unexpected. There was one day we had gone off, we were working about half an hour away from home on our last appointment with a couple that got baptized and is actually getting sealed in a week. And we were leaving their house. It was pretty close to being time to where we had to be home. So we headed out and we contemplated taking the bus, but we knew that it was going to take a little while for the bus to get to us, to stop there before getting home. And we decided, you know what, it's not raining a ton, we'll be fine, it'll probably let up, so we're just going to walk home. And it was a good 30-minute walk. And as we started heading down, it started to pour, and we just started running home. And for the next 20 minutes, we're just running in this torrential downpour until we finally got home and we could dry off all our clothes and put on some dry ones. It's crazy. One of the greatest life lessons I learned was just being persistent. Brazilians a lot of the time aren't very punctual. So you would say, okay, we'll meet you at 4 o'clock then, it's all set in stone, we're good to go. And they wouldn't show up for an hour or something. And just not a very punctual people, naturally, by culture, they're not. And it was something that I learned out of love to just keep going back. And we would drop people, obviously, because they're just people who stop progressing. We'd say, look, we need to go help other people. They need this opportunity if you're not going to take it right now. And we had to be very persistent in keeping our area book up to date so that new missionaries could see everyone we've taught and eventually return back to those people and help them accept the gospel. We had to be persistent about getting lessons about marking baptism dates because people were often unsure about it. They wanted to follow, but they'd be very hesitant. And with persistence and love, we could help them a ton as they came to realize the importance of it and often came to baptism and to be confirmed a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and to receive the Holy Ghost. And it was a very special moment to see that all that hard work and persistence you put into something finally paid off, as all these people just had so much happiness. There were still so many challenges ahead of them, and people had to go through a lot. There was one lady in Perus, and she smoked and we didn't know it. And she was going to be baptized a few days later. She was going to be baptized that Sunday, and I think it was Friday. And we wanted so bad for her to be baptized, and she wanted to finally. After this long time, she was finally like, you know what, this is what I need in my life. And we interviewed her, found out she was smoking. And she was just, we were persistent with her. We sat down and said, look, you can do it. We're not canceling your baptism Sunday. You won't be baptized until you quit smoking, but we still have that day ready for you. And she said, I'm going to do it. And from that moment, she didn't put another cigarette in her mouth, and she was baptized. And it was a very special experience just to see how hard work, persistence, and love can really lead someone to make a decision that will affect the rest of their lives and even their eternities. For a missionary going to Sao Paulo, it's pretty minimalistic. I mean, have maybe 7 short sleeve white shirts that you're going to use your entire mission. Have the same number of pants. Well, you can do different colors or whatever. I honestly just did black pants, 7 pairs of black pants, 7 white short sleeve shirts, and bunches of different ties. Keep it simple. Don't do anything crazy because you will be hauling your bags around a ton during transfers, taking them in and off buses, sometimes in members' cars, and it just gets heavy a lot of the time. Follow your missionary guideline book and stuff, and only taking 1 suit and everything. One of the things I would suggest though is bring ties. Not only just like 1 tie per day for a week or something, but bring a large collection of ties and bring some ties that you want to trade. One of my favorite memories with my companions was at the very end, I would often find some of my nicest ties and we would sign our names on the back. We'd leave a little message for them, we'd write our names. Me being from Texas, I had to always either put a little flag in there or I had to spell out Texas in a cool way and leave my little stamp of Texas on there. And then we always traded ties. So I have a tie from almost all of my companions where at the end we would just sign our ties, trade them, and then we get to keep a little souvenir from them, which was something very special to me. Something very interesting about Brazil is that they're much more believing people, especially in spirits. So I tend to think in the United States, we often just don't believe in evil spirits or something to the point where they don't exist because we say it's not there. And Brazilians just know that there are evil spirits around, and it almost invites more to them. And there would be some people who saw yellow eyes glowing underneath their dresser drawers, or would just shout crazy stuff. So there was often, not often, it didn't happen all that often, but every once in a while you find some just crazy person that probably had some spirits in them. I remember this old lady. She was homeless, walking down the streets, and she was just crazy. But I'm sure she was being told by something to spit on us and to beat us with sticks and chase after us in the streets, because she did. And there were several times walking to the mission office, there'd be a good 6 of us, and she'd just be behind a tree or something, and we'd walk past, and all of a sudden there's saliva all over us as she was just spitting on us. And wow, in the moment we were just taken aback, and we were just keep going, get away. We all laughed about it a ton afterwards. Beyond that, I mean, there were areas where I would smell marijuana every single day. You just walk out and kids are doing it on the street or whatever, teenagers, and it's a very different culture. There was definitely some culture shock as I was there, just trying to get used to it. And beyond that, Brazilians love their beer. And there will be often more bars than there are churches. And there are a lot of churches in Brazil. And on a typical street block, you can find 1 or 2 a lot of times. And they're not huge street blocks. There are lots of them. Bars are even more frequented, though. And often a Brazilian's idea of holiday or getting the day off from work is going to the bar, staying there all day. And you find lots of drunks in the street. I have drunks that chase after you and just say, "Mister, Mister," in a very broken American accent, and try to chase you down. There was one man even who met us in the bus station. We were headed home. So while I was in Brazil, there was a huge drought going on. There just wasn't any water, to the point where in my area, in the capital, in the mission office, we'd get water once every 4 days, or 2 days, and then we'd have 4 days without water, so 2 and then 4. And we would take showers, for example, with Coke bottles. On the days that we did have water, we'd fill up these 2-liter Coke bottles with water, and that's what we used to water ourselves down, soap up, and then rinse ourselves off, and that was our shower for the day. And we went to this one area far off that was having a lot of trouble. The Brazilians just in protest for the government not helping them with their water source, or often burning buses, or just doing some crazy stuff. And we went out to buy this giant, like 3,000-liter water container for some missionaries who were needing it. And they just kept in their garage filled up so that when they did get water every month or so, they could make it last during that time period. And as we were sitting in the bus station waiting to come home, we were approached by a very drunk man. And I was sitting there and we started chatting with him. He sat down next to us waiting for the bus, and he started asking us some questions. He started telling us all about his life and how he was just in the dumps, and we said, "Look, give us your address. We'll send some missionaries to our house. They'll help you out, but you have to promise to not be drunk." And he said, okay. And the stench was just horrible too. You could smell it on his breath, and it was enough to make you vomit just about. And as he was getting up to leave, he shook our hands, or what I thought he was shaking our hands. And so he grabbed my arm, I shook his hand, and then he quickly pulled it up and kissed the back of my hand. And I was so taken aback. This drunk man had just kissed me on the back of my hand, and I had no idea what to do. And I said, "Okay, yeah, nice to see you too." And we got up and walked to a different part and just kind of skirted around the edges until he was gone. Brazil has lots of wildlife. I mean, I got pooped on by birds before. You'd have tons of cats lying around, but dogs were the biggest. Lots of people either didn't keep their dogs or they'd put them out on the streets, and just there were dogs everywhere. And there was one dog in particular that just didn't like us. I mean, dogs in general, they would run after you if you ran away. So you had to kind of stand up to them or slowly back off and kind of let them know, look, I'm not going to hurt you unless you come towards me, and then I will. People have this trick sometimes where they would like pick up a fake rock and pretend to throw it at the dog or whatever. But I never found that particularly effective. And there was this one dog that lived in my first area down the street from us. We lived on a dead end street. So there's only one way out, and we always had to pass in front of this dog who was chained up in her house. And she would always bark at us as we were passing. And one day we left our house to find she was right there in the middle of the street in front of us, just growling, just baring her teeth and everything, and we thought, we're dead. She's gonna just chew through all of us, and we're not gonna exist anymore. And we totally were just confused. We sat there for quite a few minutes just waiting and thinking, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna get out of this? And finally, I don't remember whether it was me or my trainer, what we said or what we just thought. I'm sure it was something along the lines of, demon, get thee hence. And the dog went cross-eyed. I mean, the dog just stopped completely. Stopped baring its teeth, wasn't growling anymore, just sat there cross-eyed, and we went, what in the world is going on? And it started chasing its tail until it finally caught its tail and then started walking away. With its tail in its mouth, though, it couldn't walk straight, so it started walking in circles with its eyes crossed, and we were just laughing. We had no idea what was going on, and we just laughed and laughed until it finally went away. Beyond that, you'll find lots of horses in the streets because everyone just rides their horse around, especially out in the country. They'll hook it up to their little buggy and they'll go around for a ride, and that's their transportation. Instead of a car, they just use a horse. It's very interesting. There are so many opportunities for the Spirit to just swell. And I remember one of the really testimony strengthening parts of my mission was out in a city way far away from the capital called Itapetininga. And we met this guy. We were out with a member that night, and we were just trying to find people. We saw this guy out washing his car or something, getting pretty late into the night. We decided to just talk with him. He let us in. We got to share our testimonies with him and share a little about the first vision and the restoration of the gospel. And one of the questions he asked me specifically was, how do you know this is true? And I had the opportunity to just testify. And the Spirit swelled up so much, especially inside of me. I could feel it tangibly there as I just testified that I said, look, I know it's true. It's not something that came out of the blue to me. It's something that came over lots of time and just kind of realizing that I knew it was true. But as I practice the things that I've learned from this book, the principles and the doctrine that Jesus Christ really did teach to prophets here in the Americas, I just knew it was true. And there are lots of opportunities like that to just share your testimony, to bring the Spirit in, because often people would listen. I loved being able to see people change as well. Not only can you share your testimony a lot, but people just can be so ready sometimes for change. And I've had several different baptisms, a few that were rather unorthodox. There was one lady who we were teaching her, and she just knew it was true. She wanted so badly to go to church, to do everything. And she was 8.5 months pregnant. She was worried that she wouldn't be able to, she would have to postpone the baptism for a long time afterwards. So she was baptized right before, probably the week before having her kid. And I mean, we had a bunch of people in the baptismal font with her, helping her out. But it was amazing to see that. There was a couple as well that his name was Joaquin, and he had heart troubles. In fact, his heart had stopped for something like 6 or 7 minutes at one point in his life. And what brought him back to life was actually a surgical procedure invented by Elder Nelson, and where they opened up some of his heart valves using this special ring that you just insert in, plastic ring that you insert inside, and it saved his life. And because of that, he had tons of health defects, like he would get hypothermia really quickly. If he took a shower that wasn't very warm or even hot, he could get hypothermia. And the day of the baptism, in general, the baptismal font heaters, the water heaters just won't work in Brazil, or they'll be out of commission or whatever. And this one was one of those. It just wasn't working. And we finally filled up the font to a decent level, and we just didn't know what to do. So we spent a few hours getting these giant pans, and we stuck them on top of the stoves, and we put all 4 burners on. We get the water almost to boiling, and we dump it in the font, fill it up again, and go again as much as we could. But the water just wasn't warm enough. And he still chose to be baptized. We let him down into the water, and he tested it, and he said, it's really cold. And his wife just started screaming, no, stop, don't. You're going to die. It's not going to be worth it. And he sat there for a little while just contemplating and thinking, and said, no, I want it. And he stepped down into the water and was baptized, and as he came out, he just felt warm everywhere. Didn't have a single health problem at all, and it was amazing to see. There was a girl as well that on that day there just wasn't any water during the drought, and we did as much as we could to try and get water out of other people's houses, even out of water basins that were storing it upstairs in the roof of the church building. And we got about 1.5 feet of water, and she said, that's okay, I'm going to be baptized. And we stuck her on her knees, and she laid back into the water, went all the way under, and was baptized. And it was just really cool to see the faith of these people as they knew it was true, and they wanted it. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter what they would have to do to have this blessing in their lives. They would do it. I am so excited to serve a mission, because I just know it's going to be great. I have this great feeling inside of me. I'm excited and I'm ready to go. And I know it's going to be hard, but I know that it's going to be worth it as well. And I'm so excited to meet people who want to know about the gospel and want to be baptized. I'm excited to go learn and to grow, to have challenges even, so that I can be more perfect and more like my Heavenly Father, my Savior, Jesus Christ. It's going to be hard as I leave my family for 2 years and just have a completely different lifestyle. But I know that it's what Heavenly Father wants for me. And as I follow what's right, I will have the peace and the joy that the gospel brings me.